In this movie, I want to run you through the formatting buttons that appear in the Contribute toolbar when you're editing a page. Now, at first glance, you'll find a lot of similarities between this toolbar and the formatting toolbars you find in word processing programs. But the difference happens behind the scenes. Anytime you make a formatting change to any of your text, say you change the font face or the color, Contribute quickly rewrites all the necessary HTML code to make your change appear properly on screen. And by now you should already be aware that Contribute completely shields you from all that code so you can focus completely on working on your pages in a visual way. You couldn't look at the code and Contribute if you wanted to, which is okay because most Contribute users would rather spend their time working on their pages than typing a bunch of HTML code every time they needed to make a change. One thing you should keep in mind is that your site administrator can allow or deny certain user roles from being able to apply HTML styles. That prevents people from going font crazy or italics crazy and formatting every piece of text in sight. So for example, if your role is a writer or a copy editor, your site administrator might prevent you from doing anything but editing text, since there's probably no need for you to make design decisions, like whether or not you want to change the color of text or the size of text. So check with your site administrator if you find that you can't format text when you start editing your site. Also, on some sites, HTML styles might be disabled in favor of cascading style sheets, which we'll talk about in the next movie. But for now, let's walk through these formatting buttons and menus that we find up here in the toolbar to make sure you know what each one is for. Now, this first menu here allows you to format an entire paragraph as a header. You notice we have headings 1 through 6. Basically, when you have normal selected, it's just regular text. But you can choose headings 1 through 6, with 1 being the largest and 6 being the smallest in terms of size. Generally, you apply a header format to any titles or headings that appear on your page. So for instance, if I just click right here in About T, the very first line here, that's the title of my entire page, so I'm going to give that a priority of heading 1. And you can see that makes that big and bold. And T's from Around the World is my subheading, so I'm going to click in there. And notice I don't have to select the entire paragraph. I'm just clicking right in the paragraph. I'll make that heading 2. And you can see that's a little bit smaller. And as you work your way down the different headings here, they get smaller and smaller. Even heading 6, which is really small, is still emphasized by being bold, and it is still set aside as a header in case you wanted to format that with, say, cascading style sheets or something like that. I'm going to go ahead and switch that back to heading 2. So note that you can only apply header styles to an entire paragraph. You can't just select one bit of text like this that's part of a larger paragraph and try to apply a heading to it. That heading will then get applied to the entire paragraph. So headings can only be applied to entire paragraphs. But for the most part, the rest of the selections you can make here, all the way up until the alignment buttons here, you select the text first before you format it. So you can be specific about the text you want to change with these two menus and these two buttons here. This next menu here is the font selection menu. So for instance, if I wanted to select my header here, I would select that text, and maybe I want to make that a Verdana set. Just like that. And maybe I could do the same here, like so. Actually, with that text as Verdana now, it's gotten a little bigger than I like, so let's go ahead and make that a heading 2. Notice that it's added this style 1 style here, and we'll talk about that when we get to the next movie on cascading style sheets. But for now, I'm just going to make this a heading 3, just to make that a little bit smaller, and I'll change that back to Verdana. There we go, it looks a little bit better to me. Now, notice in this font list that your selection of fonts is probably significantly smaller than the list that appears in your word processor. Normally in a word processor, you have access to all the fonts installed on your computer, which can range from dozens of fonts to even hundreds of fonts. But when you're working on a web page, you have to choose fonts that are likely to be installed on the computer of the person viewing your page. And as you can imagine, this significantly shortens the list of fonts you can potentially use. So the list you see here is a list of common fonts that should be installed on just about any computer connected to the internet. Now, if you absolutely want to use a font other than what's listed here, you can do so by choosing Edit Font List. That opens the Edit Font List dialog box, and here you can see the current font list. Notice we have Courier, Georgia, Verdana, and Geneva like we saw in the menu. But notice also that it's not just single fonts listed in here. We have Courier New, Courier Mono, Georgia, Times New Roman, Times Serif, and so on and so on. These are what are called font lists. Because again, unlike when you work with a word processor when you can be very specific about the font you want to use, it's a safer bet to use font lists when you're working with web design. How this works is if you, say, choose Verdana as your font list, like I did for the headings here, when somebody browses to my site and views this page, the browser will look to see if they have Verdana installed on their computer. If they don't, it'll look for Arial. If they don't have either of those, it'll look for Helvetica. If it doesn't find any of those three, it'll default to the sans serif font face. Serifs are basically the little flourishes and decorations you see on certain fonts. Like if you look at some of these letters here, the letter H has little baselines on its feet, and Basically, the little flourish like on the letter L here, but a font like Verdana has none of those flourishes. The T is just a horizontal line and a vertical line. So there are no serifs on there. So those are sans serif. Sans is French for without. And that's the only French I know. But you can see the importance of font lists. They let you specify the font that you want to use, as well as backup fonts in case that particular one is not located on the user's computer. But if you do have a particular font you want to use that's not in the font list, for instance, if you're working on an internal company website and you know that everybody in the company has the same font installed for, say, the company logo, you can create a font list on your own. In the available fonts menu here, you'll see every single font installed on your computer. And you basically would just browse through here and find the font that you want to use. For instance, maybe my company font is Gil Sans. I would select that. Actually, before I add that, I'm going to make sure I have the Add Fonts in List Below list selected. Otherwise, I would have added that font to the Verdana set, which I don't want to do. But here with Gil Sans selected, I'm going to click the left arrow here, and you can see that's added the font. And generally, you should pick backup fonts. If this is just for an internal website, I know this is a sans serif font, and you'll find all the generic font types down at the bottom of the list here. So I know this Gil Sans is sans serif, so I'm just going to add that. And you can add as many to the list as you want. But since this would be for an internal website, that's probably plenty right there. Once you click on OK, you'll notice that Gil Sans is now part of the font list. And notice also that Contribute hides all those other font names from you. Here you just see the first font listed in those font lists. And it's just another way Contribute has been set up to not confuse people who might not understand why several fonts are listed in a row in their font menu. Okay, enough about that. The next item in our menu here is the font size. And this works pretty much the same as it does in a word processor. But here the values are in pixel sizes rather than in point sizes. So for instance, if I wanted to change this text here, I can just select that. Maybe I'll make that size 21, like so. And I'll just do that with my different T's here. Just like so. Or I can come down here and select this text here. Maybe I want the copyright text to be a little bit smaller. Like so. So that works, again, pretty much the same as it does in a word processor. Next, we have our bold and italics button, which also work pretty much the way they do in a word processor. I can select text, make it bold. Just make my way through here and just select the text I want to change and click the B button. And the keyboard commands are pretty much the same as they are in word processors too. You'll notice that it's Command or Control B for bold, I for italics, U for underline. And again, it works the same way. Just select the text you want to change and make it italics. And I could probably get rid of the quote since I italicized that text. The next couple of buttons here are the alignment buttons, which again you should be familiar with from a word processor. The default alignment in the Western world is to align the text to the left. I can click left, but it's not going to change anything visually. I can center the text, align it to the right, or I can justify. Now, it's not going to justify text that's that short, but let me go ahead and center that. If I say, select these paragraphs here and justify them, you'll see that now that we have nice straight margins over here on the right-hand side. And paragraph alignment, like paragraph formatting over here, can only be applied to entire paragraphs. I can't just center align one selection of text. It has to be the entire paragraph. And then we have our list buttons over here. List buttons are useful when you have to create, say, a numbered list or an unordered list. And you create your list by having paragraph breaks. So, for instance, each one of these T's here is actually a paragraph break. After the word dry roasted was typed here, we hit enter or return, we type black tea. At the end of this paragraph, we hit enter or return, and we type oolong tea. So notice what happens if I select these items and I click the numbered list button. It numbers each one of those items. And notice it also brings the paragraph slightly tighter together. Now, what if I don't want to assign priority to any of these items? I just want to indicate that they are individual items. In that case, you don't want a numbered list, you want a bulleted list, like so. And the nice thing about having numbered or bulleted lists is as you continue to add paragraphs, it continues to number for you, which can be especially important if you have a numbered list. Instead of typing the numbers manually, for instance, if I wanted to now make a different T, T number 3, and the oolong tea to be T number 4, all I have to do is put my cursor at the end of the second paragraph, hit return, and Contribute automatically renumbers the list for me. You can imagine how useful this would be if you had, say, a list of 100 different items, and you needed to add an item between numbers 23 and 24. If you had typed the numbers manually, you'd be sitting there a long time changing the numbers for all the subsequent list items. But if you format lists from the beginning, you're all set. And if I delete that line, it renumbers it again. We also have our outdent and indent buttons here, which if I click inside one of these paragraphs and choose to indent, you can see it moves it in and also starts renumbering it because it considers the list to be a new list since it's indented. And I can continue indenting as I go in, or I can click the other button to outdent. And finally, we have our text color button, which allows us to select text and pick a different color for it. That's the word oxidize, so let's pick a rusty color for that. And we also have highlight, which if you want to highlight some text, just select some text and choose a color to highlight with, like so. If you want to undo any of this, you can just hit Command or Control Z to undo. Also useful is the redo command. So for instance, if I wanted to redo some formatting that I've applied, so for instance, let's say that this text was not italicized first. Let me just turn that off. And now I'm going to make it italicized. And instead of having to come up here and click the italicize button, I can just choose to redo my last action. And you can see that makes that italicized. Or I learned the keyboard command of Command or Control Y, and I can just sit here with one hand on the mouse and one hand on the keyboard and just start italicizing things just by selecting them and hitting the keyboard command. And you can continue to do that as long as you don't do any formats in between, because the redo command always redoes the last format that you performed. So that's pretty much a rundown of the HTML formatting buttons in the toolbar. And again, they're pretty self-explanatory for the most part. And they're also generally the most common types of formatting actions you'll want to apply. But you might have noticed that under the format menu, there are a couple of other types available that aren't represented by buttons in the toolbar. For instance, underlining doesn't have a button, but if you wanted to underline text, you could select that. People are generally discouraged from underlining text on web pages because underlines are usually reserved for links, so you don't want to confuse people by underlining text that's not a link. And under other, we can strike through text, we can emphasize strong, which essentially is making it bold, and you can choose fixed width, which changes the text to a monospaced font. And there are a couple other items in here that you can sort of look through and see what they do. But as you can see, you have full text formatting tools available to you in Contribute. In the next movie, we'll take a look at the role cascading style sheets play in formatting your pages.